The stamp mill bell clanged out the morning shift change, a harsh iron sound that seemed to crack the frozen air over Silver Creek right down the middle. It was a raw, gray morning in November of 1884, the kind of day that tasted of sulfur and coming snow. Smoke from 100 chimneys hung low over the valley, trapped by the high peaks of the San Juans, turning the sunlight into a bruised purple haze. The mud in the streets had frozen into jagged ruts overnight, hard enough to twist an ankle, black with coal dust and the filth of a mining camp that had grown too fast and cared too little. Clara May Hollis walked the edge of the boardwalk, keeping her head down against the biting wind. At 22 years old, she had the look of a woman who had been leaned on by the world until she was nearly snapped. She was thin. Her coat was a patchwork of gray wool that had been darned so many times the original weave was a mystery, and her boots were stuffed with newspaper to keep the chill from her toes. But her chin was up. She held it high not out of vanity, but because she had learned early that looking at the ground invited pity, and in Silver Creek, pity was just a prettier word for contempt. She clutched a small burlap sack of beans to her chest, the prize of a morning spent bartering with a storekeeper who had looked at her like she was something he had scraped off his boot. "That will be 12 cents, the man had said, looking over her shoulder at a miner with a pocket full of silver. Clara had placed the coins on the counter. It was exact change, scraped together from washing floors at the boarding house. The man had swept them into his drawer and turned away without a word, leaving her standing there. When she cleared her throat, asking for a receipt so her father would not accuse her of stealing the change, the storekeeper had laughed. "Don't push your luck, girl," he had said, loud enough for the other customers to hear. "Everyone knows Silas drinks his change. I am doing you a favor by not charging you for the time you are wasting standing here." Clara had walked out with her beans and her burning cheeks, passing two women in fine bonnets who paused their conversation to watch her go. She heard the whisper as she passed, sharp as a paper cut. Her mother was the same. One woman murmured, "Weak stock." Clara tightened her grip on the beans. Her mother had not been weak. She had been exhausted. She had died 4 years ago during a winter much like this one, coughing her lungs out in a drafty cabin while Silas Hollis sat by the fire and wept about how unfair the world was to him. Clara had been 18 then, old enough to know that the doctor would not come up the hill for a family with no credit, and young enough to believe it was somehow her fault for not working harder, not sewing faster, not being enough to fill the hole in the family fortune. She turned off the main street, heading toward the shanty district where the structures were more tar paper than timber. The wind picked up, carrying the metallic tang of the smelters. A shadow detached itself from the wall of the marshal's office as she passed. It was Deputy Hatcher. He was a man of medium height with a smile that showed too many teeth and eyes that looked like wet stones. He tipped his hat, a gesture that should have been polite but felt like a threat. "Morning, Miss Clara," Hatcher said. Clara kept walking, but she slowed her pace just enough to acknowledge him. To ignore the law was dangerous, even when the law was a man like Hatcher. "Deputy," she said, keeping her eyes on the horizon. "You look cold," he said, falling into step beside her. His boots crunched heavily on the frozen mud. "A girl like you shouldn't be out in this wind without a proper escort." "I am fine," Clara said. "Your daddy at the bottle again?" Hatcher asked. His voice was sympathetic, dripping with a false honey that made Clara's skin crawl. "We had to haul him out of the gutter last night." He was making quite a speech about his ungrateful daughter. Clara stopped. She turned to look at him, her face pale but her expression set in stone. "My father is ill," she said. "He is a drunk." "Clara," Hatcher corrected gently. "And he is a drunk who owes a lot of money to a lot of bad men. You can't keep patching up his messes. Eventually, the bill comes due." He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. Clara flinched, stepping back so fast she nearly slipped on the ice. Hatcher's hand lingered in the air, his smile widening. "There are ways to pay debts. Clara," he said softly, "you are a pretty thing, underneath all that grime. I could put a word in for you. Keep the wolves away. I can look after myself, Clara said, her voice shaking despite her best effort to keep it steady. Hatcher laughed, a low, dry sound. For now, but winter is long, Clara, and everyone needs a warm place to sleep eventually. She turned and walked away, forcing herself not to run. She could feel his eyes on her back, heavy and possessive, until she rounded the corner toward her father's shack. The shack leaned against the hillside as if it were trying to retreat into the earth. The roof sagged, and the windows were stuffed with rags where the glass had broken. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of unwashed bodies, stale whiskey, and despair. Silas Hollis was sitting at the table, his head in his hands. He was a large man who had once been strong, a hard rock miner who could double jack with the best of them. Now, his muscles had gone to soft fat, and his face was a map of broken capillaries and gray stubble. Clara set the beans on the stove and began to stoke the dying fire. "Where have you been?" Silas demanded, not looking up. "Getting food," Clara said. "Did you bring any money?" "We have no money. Pa, you know that." Silas slammed his hand on the table. The noise made Clara jump, though she should have been used to it. He stood up, swaying slightly. "I need something to settle my nerves. Clara, my head is splitting open. You don't care, do you? You just watch me suffer. You're just like your mother. Cold, useless. I am not the one who drank the rent money," Clara said quietly. She knew she should stay silent, but the encounter with Hatcher had left her raw. Silas turned on her, his eyes bloodshot and wide with a sudden, weeping rage. "Don't you speak to me like that. I worked my fingers to the bone. I gave everything for this family. And this is the thanks I get? Scorn from my own flesh and blood?" He lunged for her, not to hit her, but to grab her arm. He shook her, his grip bruising. "You listen to me, girl. I am going out. I have business to attend to. You have dinner ready when I get back, and you better have found a way to fix that coat of mine, or so help me God." He shoved her away and grabbed his hat. The door banged shut behind him, leaving the shack shaking in his wake. Clara stood in the silence, rubbing her arm. She felt a deep, exhausted hollow in her chest. It wasn't the violence that scared her anymore. It was the inevitability of it. It was the knowledge that she was tied to a sinking stone. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. It wasn't the heavy pound of a creditor, but the sharp, authoritative rap of the righteous. Clara opened it to find Mrs. Gable and Mrs. Higgins, the self-appointed matriarchs of the church auxiliary. They stood on the stoop like crows in their black coats, their face pinched against the cold. "We have come to speak with you about your situation, Mrs." Gable said, pushing past Clara without waiting for an invitation. Clara left the door open for a moment, letting the cold air chase out the smell of whiskey before closing it. "What situation is that?" she asked. "Mrs." Higgins sniffed, looking around the squalid room with undisguised disgust. "The town is talking. Clara, your father's debts are becoming public, and your presence here, in this filth, is a stain on the community's conscience. We have a solution, Mrs." Gable said. "The Reverend has agreed to take you into the House of Mercy." Clara went cold. The House of Mercy was a polite name for the laundry workhouse on the edge of town. Girls went in there and they did not come out. They scrubbed sheets until their hands bled, praying for forgiveness for sins they often hadn't committed, all under the watchful eye of the Reverend, a man whose gaze lingered too long on young women. "I can't leave my father," Clara said. "Your father is beyond saving, Mrs." Higgins said sharply. "And frankly, child, you are heading down the same path. We see you walking with that deputy." "We hear the whispers. I was buying beans," Clara said, her voice rising. "Do not be insolent. Mrs." Gable snapped. "It is the laundry, or it is the street. Those are your choices. You cannot stay here and pretend you are decent while your father sells his soul for a drink. We will give you until tomorrow morning to decide. If you refuse, do not expect charity from us again." They left as abruptly as they had arrived, leaving a chill in the room that the stove couldn't touch. Clara paced the small floor, The walls felt like they were closing in. The laundry was a cage. The deputy was a trap. Her father was an anchor. Dusk fell, bringing the heavy blue darkness of the mountains. Silas had not returned. Clara knew where he would be, the back room of the Golden Nugget, where the bad liquor flowed cheap. She needed to get him. If he drank too much, he would start a fight, and Hatcher would throw him in the cell, and then the fines would destroy them completely. She wrapped her shawl tight and went back out into the wind. The town was louder now, the saloon spilling yellow light and piano music into the street. The air smelled of coal smoke and roasting meat, a hunger-inducing scent that made Clara's stomach cramp. She slipped into the side entrance of the Golden Nugget, avoiding the main bar where the eyes were too sharp. She moved toward the back storeroom, a place where deals were made away from the noise. The door was cracked open, letting out a sliver of light and the smell of cigar smoke. She heard her father's voice, slurred and whining. "I just need a little more time. Hatcher, I'm good for it. You know I'm good for it." Then she heard Hatcher's voice, smooth and terrifyingly calm. "Your credit is dead. Silas, you're 3 months behind. The owner wants his money, or he wants collateral." "I got nothing," Silas cried. "Look at me. I got nothing left to take." "You have a daughter," a third voice said. It was deep, rough, a man Clara didn't know. Clara froze, her hand hovering over the doorframe. "She's a scrawny thing," the third man continued. "But she's young. There's a place over in Durango looking for girls. They pay a finder's fee, $50. That covers your tab and leaves you with a bottle for the road." Silas was silent. The silence stretched, agonizing and thick. Clara stopped breathing. "Say no," she screamed in her head. "Say you'll work it off. Say you'll kill them for asking." "50?" Silas asked, his voice trembling. "50," Hatcher confirmed. "It's for her own good." "Silas, what life does she have here, starving with you? This way. She's fed, she's housed, and you're a free man. It's the responsible thing to do." Clara heard the clink of a bottle against a glass. "She's a good girl," Silas mumbled. "She does the washing. She'll do the washing there, too." The rough voice laughed. "Among other things. Do we have a deal, Silas? Or do I break your legs right now and take her anyway?" Silence again. Then, the scrape of a chair. "Just don't tell her I sold her," Silas whispered. "Tell her it's a job. Tell her I'm sending her away to be safe." "Done," Hatcher said. "Bring her by the office tomorrow morning." Clara backed away. She moved silently, her boots finding the dry spots on the floorboards by instinct. Once she was outside, she ran. She ran until the cold air burned her lungs like fire. She burst into the shack, gasping, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Silas arrived 10 minutes later. He looked almost sober, his face pale and sweaty. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Pack your things." "Clara," he said, staring at the floor. "Why?" she asked. She wanted to hear him say it. She wanted to see if there was any scrap of a father left inside the husk. "I found you work," he muttered. "Over the mountain. Good people. You leave in the morning." "What kind of work, Pa?" "Just work. Housekeeping. It's better than here. I'm doing this for you." "Clara, why do you always have to question me? You sold me," she whispered. Silas flinched. His head snapped up, panic warring with rage in his eyes. "I did no such thing. I'm saving you. I heard you," Clara screamed, the sound tearing out of her throat. "I heard you in the back room. $50. That's what I'm worth to you? A bar tab?" Silas's face twisted. The shame was too much for him. So he did what he always did. He turned it into anger. He swept his arm across the table, sending the empty whiskey bottle smashing against the wall. "You ungrateful little witch," he roared. "You eat my food, you live under my roof, and you judge me? I am a man. I do what I have to do to survive. You think you're better than me? You're nothing. You're just a weight around my neck." He advanced on her, his fist raised. "If you know what's good for you, you'll be ready in the morning. Or I'll drag you there myself." He stormed past her into the back room and slammed the door. Clara stood amidst the shattered glass. She looked at the door, then at the window where the night pressed in black and cold. She was not crying. The time for crying had passed years ago. She moved quickly. She found her canvas satchel and packed with the efficiency of a soldier retreating from a lost battle. A worn wool shawl, a tin locket with a strand of her mother's hair, a small paring knife she used for potatoes, a handful of flour tied in a handkerchief. She looked around the room. There was nothing else, nothing that loved her, nothing that promised her a future. She blew out the lantern. Slipping out into the alleyway felt like stepping off a cliff. The wind was howling now. A banshee screamed that rattled the eaves of the boarding house as she ghosted past. She avoided the main road. Hatcher would be watching. The roads led to other towns, and other towns had sheriffs and saloons and men like her father. She looked up. The mountains loomed, vast and indifferent white walls against the stars. There were no laws up there. There was only the weather. If she could cross the pass, she could get to the railhead in the next valley, maybe find a train going west, far west, where nobody knew the name Hollis. It was a fool's plan. It was suicide. But as Clara turned her boots toward the timberline, she knew that dying in the snow was better than living in the cage they had built for her. She would die free, with her own name on her lips. She climbed. The town fell away below her, a cluster of sparks in the dark. The air grew thinner, sharper. The mud turned to hard-packed snow, then to deep drifts that sucked at her legs. For the first hour, fear kept her warm. She imagined Hatcher's footsteps behind every tree, her father's voice in every gust of wind. But as she breached the timberline, leaving the twisted scrub pines behind for the open exposure of the high country, the weather shifted with the terrifying speed of the Rockies. The stars vanished. The sky descended, a heavy gray blanket that suffocated the world. Then, the snow began. It didn't fall. It was driven sideways, stinging like sand. The whiteout was instant. Clara lost the horizon. Up and down became meaningless. The cold punched through her thin coat, seeking the heat of her blood. Her toes went numb first, then her fingers. She stumbled, falling to her knees. She got up. She fell again. Walk, she told herself. Just walk. But the wind was a physical weight, pushing her back. Her thoughts began to spiral. She heard her father's voice. You're nothing. Weak stock. She heard the storekeeper's laugh. She heard the sound of the bottle smashing. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. The cold wasn't cold. It was a burning, searing pain that slowly faded into a dull, sleepy warmth. She knew that warmth was a lie. It was death coming to introduce itself. She found a stand of scrub pine, twisted and bent by the wind, half buried in a drift. It offered a meager shelter. She crawled into the hollow beneath the branches, curling into a ball. I am Clara May Hollis, she whispered into the roaring dark. It was a defiance. It was a prayer. Her eyes closed. The snow began to drift over her legs, tucking her in. She didn't hear the crunch of snowshoes. She didn't see the dark shape that emerged from the white void, moving with the slow, deliberate power of a bear. Elias Rourke stopped. He was checking his trap line before the storm buried it completely. A man who lived by rituals and silence. He saw the color first, the gray wool against the white snow, a shape that nature didn't make. He moved closer, his rifle slung across his back. He brushed the snow away from the huddled form. A woman. A girl. Really, blue-lipped, skin like parchment. He didn't speak. He didn't ask if she was okay, because clearly, she was dying. Elias was not a man for stupid questions. He pulled off his heavy glove and pressed his hand to her neck. A pulse, faint, fluttering like a trapped moth. But there, he made a decision instantly. He dropped to one knee, sliding his arms under her. She was terrifyingly light, nothing but bone and wet wool. He lifted her, pulling her against the buffalo coat that covered his chest, trying to share his core heat. She didn't stir. Hold on, he grunted. It was the first time he had spoken in 3 days. He turned back the way he came, moving through the blizzard with the ease of a man who knew every rock and ravine. He didn't rush. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes in this weather meant 2 bodies found in the spring thaw instead of 1. His cabin was tucked into a cleft of granite. sheltered from the prevailing wind. It was a rough structure of chinked logs and sod, ugly but impregnable. Smoke whipped from the chimney. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. The heat hit them like a physical blow. The cabin smelled of pine pitch, wood smoke, and curing pelts. Elias carried her to the cot near the cast-iron stove and laid her down. He worked quickly. Wet clothes were death. He stripped the sodden coat, the frozen boots, the thin dress that was soaked through with meltwater. He did it with a detached, clinical efficiency. His eyes focused on the task, not the skin. He wrapped her in thick wool blankets and furs, piling them high until she was a mound on the bed. He stoked the fire until the iron sides of the stove glowed cherry red. He put a kettle on to boil. Then he sat in the rough-hewn chair opposite the bed and waited. It took an hour for the shaking to start. It began as a tremor and grew into violent spasms as her blood began to move again. She gasped in her sleep, small cries of pain escaping her lips as the feeling returned to her extremities. The thaw hurt worse than the freeze. Elias knew that well. He dampened a rag with warm water and bathed her face, wiping away the grime of the mining town. He held a cup of warm water to her lips, tilting her head up. "Drink," he ordered softly. She swallowed reflexively, coughing. When she finally opened her eyes, the storm was raging against the cabin walls, 1,000 hammers beating on the wood. The room was dim, lit only by the orange flicker of the fire. Clara blinked, her vision swimming. She saw rough timber beams above her. She felt the heavy weight of furs. She smelled meat and smoke. She tried to sit up, panic surging through her chest. Where was she? Was this the afterlife? Or had Hatcher found her? She gasped, her head spinning, and collapsed back onto the pillow. "Easy," a voice said. It came from the shadows, deep and resonant like the earth itself. Clara turned her head. A man was sitting there. He was huge, his shoulders blocking the firelight. He had a beard that was dark and thick, and eyes that caught the flame. Who are you?" she rasped. Her voice sounded like broken glass. "Elias Rourke," he said. "Where am I?" "High country, above the timberline." Clara pulled the furs tighter around her chin, her heart hammering. She was alone, in a cabin, with a strange man. The stories of the mountains were full of men who lived alone for reasons that civilized folk didn't discuss. Did you bring me here? Found you in the snow. Elias said, you were about 5 minutes from being a statue." Clara looked at him, searching for the cruelty she expected from men. She looked for the leers of the deputy, the dismissal of the storekeeper, the rage of her father. She saw none of it. Elias Rourke's face was a mask of calm. He looked at her not as a prize or a burden, but as a fact. "You are safe here," he said. He stood up, and the cabin seemed to shrink around him. He walked to the stove and ladled broth into a tin cup. "I ain't going to hurt you, but you need to drink this. You need to get warm. If you die on me now, the walk to carry you back down will be a waste of my time." He held the cup out. Clara hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for it. Her fingers brushed his, calloused, rough, warm. He didn't grab her hand. He just let her take the cup. She drank. The salty broth burned her throat in the best way. She felt tears pricking her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming shock of being alive. "Why?" she asked, lowering the cup. "Why did you help me?" Elias sat back down. He studied her for a long moment. "Because you were there," he said simply. Clara looked into the fire. The shame washed over her then. She was a runaway, a girl sold for $50, a creature of the mud and the mines. "I ran away," she confessed. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I ran because they hate me, because my father is a drunk and I'm just a drunk's daughter. That's all I am." She waited for him to laugh. She waited for him to tell her that she should go back to where she belonged. Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked her dead in the eye. "Blood don't decide worth," he said. "And names are just noises people make. You're alive, girl. The mountain tried to kill you, and you're still breathing. That's what matters." He stood up and threw another log on the fire. The storm will break in 2, maybe 3 days, he said, his back to her. You can leave then, if you want. Go back down. Or try to cross the pass. Or... He paused, watching the sparks fly up the chimney. Or you can stay until you're strong enough to make it further than the first snowdrift. Your choice. He walked to the corner of the room and began unrolling a separate pallet of furs on the floor, giving her the only bed. Clara stared at his broad back, then at the fire. Outside. The wind screamed like a dying thing, clawing at the logs. Inside. It was warm. She was safe. But as she lay back, clutching the tin cup, Clara realized that this safety felt more terrifying than the blizzard. In the blizzard, she knew how to die. Here, in the quiet presence of this strange, silent man who offered choices instead of commands, she was faced with something much harder. She would have to figure out how to live. The storm did not break so much as it settled into a heavy, suffocating siege. For 3 days, the world outside the cabin was a wall of shifting white, the wind howling with a voice that sounded human and pained. Inside, time lost its shape. It was measured only by the rhythmic thud of Elias Rourke's axe splitting kindling in the corner, the hiss of snow melting in the iron pot, and the slow, creeping return of sensation to Clara's frostbitten extremities. Clara May Hollis learned the geography of the cabin by heart. It was a tight space, 12 feet by 15, built of lodgepole pine and chinked with moss and mud that had frozen hard as stone. There was the stove, a black iron beast that demanded constant feeding, the single bunk where she slept while Elias took the floor, and the table, a slab of rough-hewn pine smoothed by years of use. She fought the idleness like it was a sickness. In Silver Creek, idleness was a sin that invited punishment. If she was not working, she was not earning her keep. And if she was not earning her keep, she was a parasite. The first time she tried to stand, her legs buckled, weak as water. Elias had been there in a stride, catching her elbow before she hit the floor. "Sit," he had said. "I cannot just sit," Clara had snapped, the fear making her voice sharp. "I am not an invalid." Elias had looked at her, his hand warm through the thin fabric of her sleeve. "You are recovering. There is a difference," but Clara could not accept it. The next morning, while Elias was outside checking the windbreaks, she dragged herself to the table. There was a skillet there, crusted with the remnants of last night's salt pork. She found a rag and a tin of sand used for scouring. Her hands shook, and her fingers were stiff and clumsy, but she scrubbed. She scrubbed until her knuckles were white and the iron gleamed dull and clean. When Elias returned, bringing a gust of freezing air and a swirl of snow with him, he stopped at the door. He looked at the clean pan, then at Clara, who was leaning against the table, breathless and pale. "You did not have to do that," he said, hanging his coat on the peg. "I pay my way," Clara said. Her chin was up, that same stubborn tilt she had used against the storekeeper. "I do not take charity, Mr. Rourke." Elias walked to the stove and warmed his hands. "It is not charity to let a bone knit," he said quietly, "but if it matters to you, the pan looks good." It mattered. It mattered more than she could say. Over the next week, a fragile rhythm established itself. Elias was a man of few words, but he was not unkind. He moved with a deliberate slowness when he was near her, a concession she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. One evening, he reached suddenly for the coffee pot, his arm sweeping across her line of sight. Clara flinched, shrinking back against the wall, her arm coming up to protect her face. It was a reflex, fast as a blink, born of years dodging Silas's backhands. Elias froze. His hand hovered in the air, the coffee pot forgotten. He did not look at her, but his stillness was absolute. He waited until she lowered her arm, until the shallow, panicked rhythm of her breathing slowed. "I am not him," Elias said. He spoke to the stove, not to her. "I know," Clara whispered, shame burning her cheeks. Elias poured the coffee. From then on, he announced his movements. "I am going to the woodpile. I am reaching for the salt." He made himself predictable, a landscape she could navigate without fear of sudden storms. He taught her the cabin's survival without talking down to her. He showed her how to bank the fire at night, arranging the logs so the coals would breathe till morning. "You don't want to smother it," he explained, handing her the poker. "Fire needs air just like we do. Pack it too tight, it dies. Leave it too loose, it burns out fast. You have to find the balance." Clara poked at the embers. Like people, she thought. Squeeze them too hard, and the light goes out. He taught her how to listen to the wind. "Hear that low whistle in the chimney?" Elias asked one night, pausing with a spoonful of beans halfway to his mouth. "That means the wind is shifting north. Temperature will drop 10 degrees by morning. We need to hang the extra pelt over the door." Clara listened. To her, it just sounded like cold. But she nodded, learning to hear the language of the high country. She watched him, too, when he didn't know she was looking. He was a puzzle. His hands were scarred, the knuckles thick and battered. But he mended his own clothes with a needle and thread, his stitches neat and tiny. He had a rifle, a Winchester that he kept cleaned and oiled. But she never saw him fire it unless he had to. "Where are you from?" she asked one night. The fire was roaring, casting long, dancing shadows against the logs. Clara was sitting on the floor, braiding her hair. It was clean now, shining like burnished copper in the firelight. Elias was whittling a piece of pine, the shavings curling onto the floor. "East," he said. "East is a big place, big enough to get lost in," he replied. "Why did you come up here? To be alone?" Elias paused, the knife stilled against the wood. "It is safer," he said. "For everyone." He looked up then, and his eyes caught hers. For a second, the mask slipped. Clara saw a deep, ancient weariness in him, a loneliness that matched her own. He looked at her braid, at the curve of her neck where the firelight touched the skin, and for a heartbeat, there was something else, a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Then he looked away, jaw tightening. He went back to whittling, the knife moving faster, stripping the wood away as if he were punishing it. The hunger that had to do with food, however, was becoming a real problem. The storm had buried the traps. For 3 days. Elias came back empty-handed. The sack of flour was getting low, and the dried meat was gone. Dinner that night was a watery broth with a few dumplings made of flour and water. Elias ladled the stew into 2 bowls. He gave Clara the bowl that was 3/4 full, keeping only a few spoonfuls for himself. Clara stared at the bowls. The inequality of it stung her pride like a slap. "Switch with me," she said. "Eat," Elias said, dipping his spoon. "I am not a child," Clara said, her voice rising. "And I am not a pet to be fed scraps while the master starves. You are twice my size. You do the work. You need the food. I can last," Elias said. "You have no reserves. Clara, you are thin as a rail. Eat the food. It makes me feel small," she said, her voice trembling. "It makes me feel like I owe you, and I cannot pay you. Elias, I have nothing." Elias set his spoon down. He looked at her across the table, his expression unreadable. "You think I am keeping a ledger?" he asked. "You think I am making marks in a book somewhere? You ate a potato, so you owe me a copper? That is town thinking. Clara, up here, you eat because if you don't, you die. And if you die, I have to dig a hole in frozen ground, eat the dumplings to save me the digging." It was a harsh joke, but it broke the tension. Clara ate, but the resentment simmered. She hated the dependency. She hated that she was alive only because this man decided she should be. Every mouthful felt like a debt she could never settle. 2 days later, the sky cleared to a brilliant, blinding blue. The sun reflected off the snow with a glare that felt like needles in the eyes. The air was still, frozen into a crystal silence. Elias had gone to check the lower ridge for snowshoe hares. The cabin was empty. Clara stood at the window. She saw the pass in the distance, a dip between 2 jagged peaks. It looked close. In the clear air, distances were deceptive. It looked like she could walk there in an hour. She made a decision. She would not be a burden. She would not be the stray dog Silas Hollis had kicked and Elias Rourke had taken in. She packed her small satchel. She wrapped her shawl tight. She left the cabin without looking back. The cold hit her instantly. A solid wall. But she pushed through. The snow was crusted over, hard enough to support her weight if she moved carefully. She walked toward the pass, her breath pluming in white clouds. I am free, she told herself. I am walking on my own 2 feet. But the mountain was a liar. The pass was miles away, not yards. The glare of the sun on the snow began to burn her retinas, turning the world into a painful wash of white and black spots. Her legs, weakened by weeks of malnutrition, began to tremble. The air was so thin it felt like breathing glass. She made it perhaps half a mile. Dizziness spun the world sideways. The horizon tilted. She sat down, just to rest for a moment, just to catch her breath. The cold seeped through her boots instantly. She closed her eyes against the glare. She didn't hear him coming until his shadow fell over her, blocking the sun. Clara looked up. Squinting, Elias stood there. He wasn't breathing hard, but his face was tight, his eyes dark. Going for a stroll? He asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. I was leaving, Clara said. She tried to stand, but her legs refused to cooperate. I was going to the railhead. The railhead is 40 miles that way, Elias said, pointing west, and the pass is blocked with 10 feet of drift. You would have made it maybe another hour. Then the sun would go down, and you would freeze solid. He didn't yell. He didn't grab her. He just stated the facts, brutal and unadorned. I can't stay there, Clara whispered. I can't just take from you. Elias knelt in the snow. He looked at her, and his expression softened. Just a fraction. You're stubborn. Clara May, I will give you that. He reached out and pulled her up. He didn't sling her over his shoulder like a sack of flour this time. He supported her, his arm around her waist, letting her walk, letting her keep her dignity even as he guided her back. You won't survive the pass yet, he said as they walked. And I won't bury you. I told you that. I don't break my word. Back in the cabin, the heat was overwhelming. Elias sat her by the fire and began to chafe her hands, getting the blood moving. You have to wait for spring, he said. I hate waiting, Clara said. I know, Elias replied. He stood to get a blanket from the bunk. The cabin was small, the space between the table and the stove narrow. As he turned, he stepped close to her. Too close. Clara looked up. Elias froze. He was holding the wool blanket, his hands suspended. His chest was inches from her face. She could smell him, wood smoke, pine resin, and the clean, sharp scent of the cold. She didn't flinch. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken, charged with a sudden, electric tension. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She felt a sudden, terrifying urge to lean forward, to press her face against the rough wool of his coat. It was a hunger that scared her more than the starvation had. Elias's eyes searched hers. His pupils were blown wide. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, debating whether to jump. Then he stepped back. The moment snapped like a dry twig. Wrap up, he said, his voice rough. You're shivering. He tossed the blanket to her and turned away, busying himself with the stove, making a great show of rattling the lid. Clara wrapped the wool around her shoulders, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. That night, the nightmares came. Clara was back in the shack in Silver Creek. Silas was there, looming over her, a bottle in his hand. You're worth $50, he screamed. That's all. $50 and a bottle of rye. Hatcher was laughing in the corner, his teeth sharp as a wolf's. Come here, little girl. Let me keep you warm. No! Clara screamed. No! She woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright. Her face was wet with tears. The cabin was dark, save for the dying embers in the stove. But there was a shape by the door. Elias was sitting there, his back against the timber, his rifle across his knees. He wasn't sleeping. He was watching. Clara wiped her face, her breath hitching. You're awake. Elias didn't move. Heard you crying out, he said softly. It was a bad dream. I know the kind. Elias said. Clara pulled her knees to her chest. Do they ever go away? Elias was silent for a long time. "No," he said finally. "But they get quieter." He shifted his weight, the wood of the floor creaking. "I know what it is." "Clara," he said into the darkness. "To be blamed for sins that ain't yours. To carry a weight someone else strapped to your back." Clara looked at his silhouette. It was the first time he had offered her a piece of himself that wasn't just practical survival. "Is that why you're here?" she asked. "Because of sins?" Elias didn't answer. He just settled his rifle more comfortably in his lap. "Go to sleep. Clara, I'm watching the door. Nothing gets in." And for the first time in her life, Clara believed it. She lay back down, and the sound of his breathing by the door was a lullaby that chased the ghosts away. 2 days later, the world intruded. It started with the barking of a dog, distant but clear in the thin air. Elias was instantly alert. He moved to the window, peering through the crack in the shutter. "Get back," he said, "away from the door." Clara scrambled off the cot, pressing herself into the corner behind the stove. "Who is it?" "2 men, Elias said, "on snowshoes, following a track." He took his Winchester from the rack. He checked the action. A sharp, mechanical clack-clack that sounded deafening in the small room. "Stay out of sight," he ordered. A heavy fist pounded on the door. "Hello, the house," a voice shouted. It was a rough voice, winded from the climb. Elias opened the door. He didn't step out, but he filled the frame, the rifle cradled in the crook of his arm. It wasn't pointed at them, but it was ready. "That's far enough," Elias said. Clara peeked through the gap between the stove and the wall. She saw 2 men standing in the snow. They were bundled in furs, their faces red with cold and exertion. One was tall and stringy, the other squat with a thick mustache. She recognized the squat one. It was Miller, a man who swept floors at the Golden Nugget and did odd jobs for the sheriff. "We're looking for a girl," Miller said, panting. "Runaway, name of Hollis. Silas Hollis's girl. She ain't here," Elias said. His voice was flat. "A stone wall." "We tracked her to the timberline," Miller said, squinting at Elias. "Found sign leading up this way before the snow covered it." "She's stolen property. Mister. Her daddy has papers on her, a labor contract. She ain't property," Elias said. "Yes." "She's a drunk's get," the stringy man spat. "A loose woman, from what we hear, running off to avoid her debts. We're just bringing her home. For her own good." Clara felt the shame curl in her gut like hot lead. Loose, bad blood, thief. The words were arrows, and they found their mark. She trembled, waiting for Elias to step aside. Why wouldn't he? Why would he fight 2 men for a stranger who brought nothing but trouble? "We know she's in there," Miller said, stepping forward. "We saw the smoke. Now, you stand aside. Mountain man, we don't have a quarrel with you, but the sheriff wants the girl." Elias didn't budge. He shifted his grip on the rifle. "You turn around," Elias said. "You go back down the mountain." "Is that a threat?" Miller asked, his hand dropping to the pistol at his belt. "It's a fact," Elias said. "You aren't taking her." "And why is that?" Miller sneered. "You claim her. She your whore now?" The silence that followed was terrifying. Clara pressed her hand over her mouth. "She is my wife," Elias said. The words hung in the frozen air. Clara's eyes went wide. Miller blinked. He looked at his partner, then burst out laughing. "Your wife? Since when? We didn't hear no wedding bells in Silver Creek." "Since she stepped through this door," Elias said, "and in the high country, my word is the law. She is Mrs. Rourke, and any man who tries to put a hand on my wife answers to me." He raised the rifle then. He didn't aim it, but the barrel drifted just enough to cover Miller's chest. His eyes were cold, devoid of fear, devoid of hesitation. It was the look of a man who had killed before and would not lose sleep over doing it again. Miller's laugh died. He looked at the rifle, then at Elias's face. He saw the death waiting there. "You're making a mistake, friend," Miller said, his voice losing its bluster. "The sheriff won't like this. Kidnapping a girl. She is where she belongs. Elias said, 'Now, walk.'" Miller hesitated, then spat in the snow. "Have it your way." "But the snow don't last forever. We'll be back, and we'll bring the law." They turned and trudged away, their snowshoes kicking up powder. Elias watched them until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he stepped back inside and bolted the door. He leaned the rifle against the wall and exhaled. A long, shuddering breath. Clara exploded from the corner. "Why did you say that?" she demanded, her voice shrill with shock and anger. "Why did you tell them that lie?" Elias turned to look at her. He looked tired. It was the only thing they would understand. He said, "You claimed me like a horse," Clara cried. "My wife. Like I am just something else you own." Elias crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed her shoulders. Not hard, but firm enough to stop her pacing. "Listen to me," he said, his voice intense. "Down there, without a name. You are a stray. You are property without a fence. Anyone can walk in and take you. Hatcher, your father, those men. They see a woman alone, and they see meat." Clara pulled away, breathing hard. "So you put your brand on me instead. I gave you cover," Elias shouted back. "It was a bluff. Clara, a shield. If you are my wife, they have to go through me to get to you. It buys us time. I don't want to be anyone's cover," Clara yelled. "I don't want to hide behind a man's name. Then you will die," Elias said ruthlessly. "That is the world we live in. You want to change it? Fine, but you have to survive it first." Clara stared at him. She hated him in that moment. She hated him because he was right. She hated the world that made him right. Elias rubbed his face with his hand. "Look, when spring comes, if we go down there, we can make it real. A paper marriage. Or we can part ways. But until the snow melts, you are Clara Rourke to anyone who asks. That is the bargain." Clara looked at the floor. "A paper marriage. A contract. And if I choose to leave in the spring, then you leave," Elias said, "and I annul it. But until then," he reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small object and held it out to her. Clara looked. It was a ring, but not of gold or silver. It was carved from dark ironwood, polished until it shone like glass. It was simple, perfectly round, with a delicate vine pattern etched into the surface. "I made this," Elias said quietly, "a long time ago. For no one, just to see if I could." He took her hand. His fingers were rough, but his touch was hesitant. "I am not putting a chain on you. Clara, I am offering you a weapon. You wear this, and men like Miller think twice. It means you are not alone. It means I stand between you and the harm." Clara looked at the ring sitting in her palm. It was light, warm from his pocket. It was beautiful. She trembled. She felt a surge of emotion she couldn't name, relief that she wasn't alone, grief that it had come to this, and a sudden, startling heat that radiated from where his skin touched hers. She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit. She looked up at him. Her eyes were wet. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be loved without paying for it. I don't know how to be safe without being owned." Elias looked at her, and his face softened into something tragic and tender. "You'll learn," he said quietly. "If you stay." He turned and went back to the window to watch the white emptiness where the men had vanished, leaving Clara standing by the fire, the wooden ring warm against her skin, weighing nothing and everything all at once. The heavy siege of the storm eventually broke, but winter did not release its grip on the high country. It merely changed its temper. The blinding whiteouts were replaced by a stillness so deep and brittle that the snapping of a pine branch sounded like a gunshot. The snow lay 6 feet deep in the hollows, a crust of ice forming over the top that could bear the weight of a fox, but not a man. Inside the cabin, the world had shrunk to the essentials: heat, food, and the slow, quiet weaving of 2 lives that had been thrown together by desperation. Supplies were running low. The flour sack was limp, folding over on itself like a weary lung. The dried meat was down to strips of venison jerky that required long chewing, and the coffee was more chicory than bean. Clara and Elias worked as a unit now. It was a necessity born of survival, but it had become a rhythm. When Elias went out to chop wood, Clara was there to stack it, her breath pluming in the frigid air as she fit the split logs into the sheltered ricks against the cabin wall. When he brought in a marten or a snowshoe hare from the trap line, she was the one who boiled the water to scald the pelt, her hands red and chapped but steady. She was healing. The hollows in her cheeks were filling in, not with fat, but with the lean muscle of someone who worked hard and ate regularly. The bruises on her soul, however, were slower to fade. Shame was a habit Clara had practiced for a lifetime. Every time she sat at the table and ate the portion Elias set out for her, she felt the old guilt rise, the voice of Silver Creek whispering that she was a mouth to feed, a burden, a thing of no value. She expected him to regret her. She watched him for it. She watched for the sigh of irritation when she dropped a spoon, or the tightening of his jaw when the firewood ran low. But Elias Rourke was a man of stone and patience. He did not sigh. He did not scold. He simply did what needed doing, and he expected her to do the same. One afternoon, when the sun was high and the glare off the snow was blinding, Elias took the Winchester down from the rack. "Put your coat on," he said. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "Is there trouble?" "Not yet," Elias said, "but trouble travels. Come outside." He led her to a clearing 100 yards from the cabin. He set a pine cone on a stump and walked back to where she stood. He handed her the rifle. It was heavy, the wood stock smooth and cold against her cheek, the metal smelling of gun oil and history. "It ain't a broom," Elias said, adjusting her grip. "Don't hold it like you are afraid of it. Pull it into your shoulder, tight. If you leave a gap, the kick will bruise you." Clara pulled the stock against her wool coat. She felt ridiculous. "I have never fired a gun. Elias, my father said they were men's business. Your father was a fool about many things." Elias said, "Up here, a rifle is survival. It don't care if you are a man or a woman. It only cares if your aim is true." He stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He reached around to adjust her elbow, his voice low in her ear. "Breathe in," he instructed. "Let half of it out. Hold it. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull it. Squeeze it like you are trying to crush a grape without breaking the skin." Clara focused. The sight danced over the pine cone. She took a breath. She let it out. She squeezed. The rifle cracked, a thunderclap that echoed off the granite peaks. The stock punched her shoulder, but she held her ground. On the stump, the pine cone shattered into splinters. "I hit it," Clara cried. She turned to him, a smile breaking across her face. It was a genuine smile, bright and sudden, transforming her face from a mask of caution into something young and alive. Elias looked at her, his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Good shot," he said. Clara realized she was smiling. She realized she was happy. The feeling terrified her. She dropped her eyes, the smile vanishing as she retreated back behind her walls. I got lucky," she mumbled. "Luck is fine," Elias said, taking the rifle back. "But skill is better. We will do it again tomorrow." The lessons continued. But so did the unease. The isolation of the mountains was not absolute. Sound carried in the thin air, and twice in 1 week, they heard the distant pop-pop of gunfire from the valley floor. It was too rhythmic to be a hunter. It was a signal. Then, a few days later, while gathering kindling near the ridge, Clara saw a rider. He was a speck of black against the white vastness below, moving along the tree line where the snow was packed down. He paused, looking up toward the peaks, before turning back. They haven't forgotten. Clara said that night. She was stirring the stew, her back to Elias. "Men like that don't forget what they think they own," Elias replied. He was cleaning the rifle, the disassembled parts laid out on the table on a piece of oilcloth. Clara stopped stirring. The steam rose around her face. "It wasn't just the money," she said softly. "With my father, it wasn't just the $50. Elias paused in his work. "What do you mean?" Clara stared into the bubbling broth. "The drinking. It made him bring people home. Men from the mines. Supervisors. Sometimes he would pass out, and they would still be there, sitting in our kitchen, watching me. She turned to face him. She needed to say it. She needed him to know exactly what kind of ruin she came from. I learned to be small, she said. I learned to hide in the cupboard under the stairs. I learned that if I made a sound, they would find me. One of them. He called me his little bird. He said he wanted to see if I could fly. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. She gripped the spoon until her knuckles were white. I carried a knife in my boot since I was 12. Elias. Not because of bears, because of my father's friends. And he knew. He knew they were there, and he let them stay because they brought bottles. Elias sat very still. The firelight cast deep shadows over his eyes, turning them into dark pools. He carefully set down the rag he was using to clean the bolt. He did not explode. He did not shout. But the air in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. His anger was a contained thing, a pressure vessel waiting to burst. He looked at her, and Clara saw a fury there that frightened her. But she realized with a jolt that it was not directed at her. It was a protective fury. It was the look of a wolf guarding the pack. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. "It makes me dirty," Clara whispered. "That is what the town says. The town is a liar," Elias said. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the dark. "Dirt washes off. Clara, what they did to you, that is on their souls, not yours. You survived it. That makes you iron, not dirt." He didn't ask for names. He didn't press for the gory details of what might have happened in that kitchen. He simply acknowledged the weight of it and refused to let her carry it alone. The weather warmed slightly the next day, a false spring that softened the ice on the creek. They needed water. The barrel was empty. "I will get it," Clara said, picking up the buckets. "Be careful," Elias warned. "The ice is rotting near the banks." "I know," she said. She walked down to the creek, the buckets banging against her legs. The silence of the woods was peaceful. She found the hole Elias had chopped in the ice. It had skimmed over during the night. She knelt, using the handle of the bucket to break the new crust. She leaned forward to dip the bucket. The ice beneath her knees gave way with a sickening crack. There was no time to scream. One moment she was kneeling on solid ground, the next, she was plunged into liquid fire. The water was so cold it punched the air from her lungs. She went under, the current grabbing at her skirts, dragging her toward the darker water under the main sheet of ice. She thrashed, her hands clawing at the jagged edge of the hole. Her heavy wool coat soaked up the water instantly, becoming an anchor that pulled her down. "Elias!" She tried to scream, but water filled her mouth. She kicked, her boots heavy as lead. Her hand found the edge of the ice, but it was slick. She slipped. The current pulled harder. Then, a hand clamped around her wrist. It was a grip of iron. Elias was there, lying flat on the ice, his face contorted with effort. He hauled her up, dragging her wet and gasping over the jagged edge. He didn't stop when she was clear of the water. He pulled her all the way to the snowbank, away from the treacherous edge. They collapsed together in the snow. Clara was coughing, spitting up freezing water, shaking so violently her teeth clacked together. Elias was breathing hard, his face pale. He grabbed her, pulling her upright. "We have to move," he shouted. "Now! Before you freeze!" He practically carried her up the slope to the cabin. He kicked the door open and dropped her in front of the stove. "Get them off," he ordered. "Every stitch." He turned his back, throwing logs into the fire until the flames roared up the chimney. Clara fumbled with her buttons, but her fingers were useless blocks of wood. "She couldn't do it. I can't," she chattered. I can't." Elias turned. He saw her struggles. He didn't hesitate. He knelt before her, his face grim. "Forgive me," he said. He unbuttoned her coat, stripping the heavy, sodden wool away. He unlaced her boots, pulling them off. He worked with frantic speed, peeling the wet dress from her shoulders. He wrapped her in the dry blankets from the bunk, rubbing her arms and back vigorously to generate heat. In the struggle, in the frantic friction of wool against skin, the panic began to subside, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming awareness. Elias stopped rubbing. His hands were on her arms, gripping her through the blanket. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. Clara looked up at him. Her hair was plastered to her skull, dripping water onto the floor. Her lips were blue, but she was alive, and he was very, very close. His eyes searched hers, wild and dark. He held her too tight, as if he were trying to anchor her to the earth, as if he were terrified that if he let go, she would slip back under the ice. "You scared me," he whispered. The admission sounded torn from his throat. Clara looked at him. The heat from the stove was baking her skin, but the heat inside her was hotter. She saw the fear in his eyes, and beneath it, the desire he had been keeping on a leash for months. "Elias," she breathed. The tension that had been building since the first night broke. It didn't snap. It melted, hot and undeniable. He leaned in. He didn't take. He waited, hovering inches from her lips, giving her the choice even now, even in the extremity of the moment. Clara closed the gap. She kissed him. It wasn't a tentative peck. It was a collision. Her hands freed themselves from the blanket and tangled in his beard, pulling him closer. She kissed him with a hunger that surprised her, a fierce, reclaiming demand. It felt like her body was choosing life, choosing heat, choosing this man who had pulled her from the cold. Elias made a low sound in his throat and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into his lap. He kissed her back with a desperate intensity, tasting of wood smoke and coffee. They stayed there on the floor in front of the roaring stove. The intimacy was raw, a tangle of limbs and heavy breaths, but it remained rooted in the respect Elias had shown her from the start. When Clara flinched as his hand grazed her ribs, he stopped instantly, waiting until she nodded, until she pulled him back. It was intense because it was careful. It was powerful because, for the first time in Clara's life, she was not being taken. She was being received. When the fire finally died down to coals, Elias held her. She was wrapped in the blankets, her head resting on his chest. She could hear the slow, strong beat of his heart. Tears began to leak from her eyes, silent, hot tears that soaked into his shirt. Elias stiffened. "Did I hurt you?" he asked, his voice laced with sudden panic. "No," Clara whispered. "Then why do you weep?" "Because you didn't," she said. "Because you touched me, and you didn't hurt me. I didn't know. I didn't know it could be like that." Elias let out a long breath. He tightened his arms around her, burying his face in her damp hair. He held her as if she were made of smoke, as if he were afraid she would vanish if he loosened his grip for even a second. The morning brought the sun, and with it, the cold light of reality. Clara woke in the bunk. Elias was already up, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. The memory of the night before washed over her, and with it came a crashing wave of old programming. She sat up, pulling the blanket to her chin. Her heart hammered. She was a fallen woman now, truly. In the eyes of the church, in the eyes of the town, she was ruined. She had given herself to a man who was not her husband by law. Elias turned. He saw the panic in her eyes. He saw the way she curled in on herself. "Don't," he said firmly. Clara looked at him, her eyes wide. I shouldn't have." "Don't do that," Elias said. He stood up and walked to the bunk. He didn't touch her, but he stood close, blocking out the rest of the room. "Do not let the town into this cabin. Clara, what happened last night was not a sin. I am ruined," she whispered. "That is what they will say." "You are alive," Elias said. "You nearly died in the creek. Your body wanted to live. Alive is not a sin. Clara, it is a victory." He sat on the edge of the bunk. He looked down at his hands, clasping them together. "You asked me once about my past," he said, "about why I came up here." Clara nodded, distracted from her shame by the shift in his tone. "I wasn't always a trapper." He said, 10 years ago, over in Leadville, I was an enforcer for the mining company. Big man, good with his fists. They paid me to keep the peace. Or what they called peace." He looked at her, his eyes hard with memory. There was a foreman. He was skimming wages, and the local lawman was in on it. The miners tried to strike. The foreman told me to break heads. I refused, so they came for me. They came for the woman I was with then. Clara held her breath. I stopped them, Elias said flatly. But it got ugly. I hurt the lawmen bad. I had to leave. I had to run before they hung me for defending my own. I have been running ever since. That is why I stay up here. Because down there, the law belongs to the men who pay for it. He looked at her, his expression vulnerable. I am a wanted man. Clara, or I was. Maybe they stopped looking. But the danger is real. By being with me, you are stepping into that shadow. Clara looked at him. She thought of the deputy, of Hatcher, of her father. The shadow is already there. Elias, she said softly, I was born in it, at least with you, at least here. I have a say in it. He reached out and took her hand. You have a say. He promised, always. 3 days later, the shadow arrived at their doorstep. It wasn't a raid. It was a visitation. 2 figures appeared at the edge of the clearing, a man in a black coat and another with a tin star pinned to his chest. It was the preacher from Silver Creek, Reverend Thomas, and a new deputy Clara didn't know, a young man with a cruel mouth. They didn't come to the door. They stood at the tree line, shouting across the snow. Clara May Hollis, the preacher called out. His voice was a practiced boom, meant to reach the back pews. We know you are there. We have come to offer you salvation. Clara stood by the window, trembling. Elias stood beside her, the rifle in his hand, but he stayed back from the glass. Return to the fold. Child, the preacher shouted, leave this life of sin. The church will forgive you. We have a place prepared for you. A place, Clara whispered. The laundry, the cage, and you. Rourke, the deputy yelled. We know you have her. Give her up, and the sheriff might overlook the kidnapping charge. Clara turned to Elias. Let's run, she said. We can go higher, over the ridge. There are caves. Elias shook his head. We can't live like hunted animals. Clara, not forever. Eventually, the pass will open. They will come in numbers. If we run now, we run for the rest of our lives. You will never have a name. You will never have peace. Then what do? She asked. We wait for the thaw, Elias said, and then we go down. But we go down on our terms. He laid out the plan that night. It was terrifying in its boldness. They would go into town not as captives, but as citizens. They would demand a legal marriage, forcing the clerk to record it. They would file a claim on Elias's land, making it legal property that couldn't be seized without a court order. And they would confront Silas and the sheriff in broad daylight, with the town watching. We need evidence. Elias said, we need more than just our word. Clara went to her satchel. She pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook she had taken from the general store years ago and never used. She found a pencil stub. I will write it down. She said, write what? Everything. Clara said, the dates, the names, the times my father took money, the times Hatcher threatened me, the time Silas tried to sell me in the back of the Golden Nugget. She opened the book. The paper was yellowed, but it was blank. It was a clean slate. I will write my story, she said, her voice gaining strength. If they want to judge me, let them judge the truth. She began to write. It was slow work. Her hand cramped, and the memories were painful to drag into the light. But with every sentence, she felt a brick being removed from the wall of shame that surrounded her. She was turning her pain into testimony. A week later, the weather warmed enough for Elias to chop wood without a coat. He was around the back of the cabin, splitting a large knotty pine log. The rhythmic thwack of the axe was the only sound in the afternoon air. Clara was shaking out the rugs on the front porch. She heard a crunch of snow. She turned, expecting Elias. It was the deputy, the young one with the cruel mouth. He had circled around, moving silently while the axe covered his approach. He was 10 feet away, leaning against a tree, a smug smile on his face. Hello, Clara, he said softly. Clara dropped the rug. She took a step back toward the door. Don't run, he said. I just want to talk. The sheriff sent me. He's worried about you. He thinks you might be lonely up here with that savage. He pushed off the tree and took a step toward her. "You know, if you come back with me quietly, I can make sure you're treated right. A pretty thing like you shouldn't be roughing it. I could keep you comfortable." His eyes raked over her. It was the same look Hatcher had given her, the same look the men in her father's kitchen had given her. It implied ownership. It implied that she was a thing to be used. Clara felt the old helplessness surge, a cold wave of paralysis. "Be small," the voice in her head whispered. "Hide." Then she remembered the rifle kicking against her shoulder. She remembered the notebook filled with her truth. She remembered Elias holding her by the fire. She was not small anymore. She reached into her apron pocket. Her hand closed around the handle of the paring knife. "Step back," she said. The deputy laughed. "Or what? You'll scream?" Clara pulled the knife. She held it low, edge up, just like Elias had shown her with the skinning blade. Her hand shook, just a little, but her voice was steady as a rock. "Or I will bleed you," she said. The deputy stopped. The smile faltered. He looked at the knife, then at her eyes. He didn't see a victim. He saw a woman who had survived a winter at 10,000 feet. "You wouldn't dare," he sneered. "Try me," Clara said. "Take one more step." The deputy hesitated. In that second of hesitation, a shadow fell over him. Elias came around the corner of the cabin. He held the axe in his hand. He didn't raise it. He didn't have to. He took in the scene in a single glance. The deputy, the knife, Clara's stance. "You made a mistake," Elias said. His voice was very quiet. The deputy spun around, his hand dropping to his gun belt. "Don't," Elias said. The deputy froze. He looked at the axe, then at the rifle leaning against the porch rail. He realized he was outflanked and outmatched. "I was just checking on the girl," the deputy stammered, backing away. "She gave you her answer." Elias said, "Now get off my land." The deputy glared at them. His pride stung. "You'll regret this, Rourke. Both of you." He turned and scrambled back into the trees, disappearing down the slope. Elias walked up the steps. He looked at the knife in Clara's hand. "You held your ground," he said. Clara folded the knife and put it back in her pocket. She was trembling now, the adrenaline fading. "I was scared," she admitted. "Courage isn't about not being scared." "Clara," Elias said, placing a hand on her shoulder, "courage is a decision. You make it, and then you make it again." He looked out at the valley, where the snow was beginning to turn gray and slushy. "Spring is coming," he said. "The pass will be open in a week." Clara looked at the dripping eaves, where a steady plink, plink, plink of meltwater marked the passage of time. The winter was ending. The cocoon was breaking. "I am ready," she said. She wasn't just talking about the trip to town. She looked at the notebook lying on the table inside the cabin. She looked at the man standing beside her. She realized she didn't just want to survive anymore. She didn't want to hide in a hole and hope the wolves passed her by. She wanted a life she could stand in. She wanted to walk down that mountain and look the world in the eye. "Let them come," she thought. "I have my name, I have my witness, and I have my husband." Spring arrived in the high country, not with a gentle unfurling of flowers, but with the violence of a breaking fever. The silence of the winter months was shattered by the roar of water. Every ravine, every gully, every scar on the granite face of the mountain ran white with meltwater. The snow, once a pristine sheet of iron-hard crust, turned into a treacherous slush that sucked at boots and hooves alike. Elias Rourke and Clara May Hollis began their descent on a Tuesday morning in late April. The air smelled of wet earth, pine resin, and the metallic tang of ozone from the storms that rolled along the peaks. They traveled with a pack mule Elias had kept stabled in a lean-to behind the cabin, the animal grumpy and stiff from the long confinement. Clara rode the mule for the difficult stretches, her knuckles white where she gripped the pommel of the saddle. Elias walked ahead, leading the animal, his boots sinking deep into the mud that coated the trail. He carried his Winchester in the crook of his arm, not slung over his back. The mountain felt generous in its awakening, the green shoots of wild onion pushing through the rot. the return of the jays flashing blue in the timber, but it was dangerous too. Avalanches were a constant threat. Twice, they heard the thunderous crack and rumble of snow sliding off the high faces, the sound echoing like cannon fire down the valley. Once, they had to double back and find a new route because the trail had been washed away by a creek that had swollen into a raging river, tossing boulders the size of anvils in its current. But the physical danger of the trail was nothing compared to the cold dread sitting in Clara's stomach. Every mile they put behind them was a mile closer to Silver Creek. Every step downhill felt like walking backward into a cage she had chewed her way out of. She touched the pocket of her coat, feeling the hard rectangle of the notebook. It was wrapped in oilcloth to keep it dry. Inside were the names, the dates, the truth. It was the only shield she had, other than the man walking 10 paces ahead of her. By the second day, they reached the foothills. The air grew thicker, warmer, and heavy with the scent of coal smoke drifting up from the valley floor. They stopped at a small homestead to water the mule and buy grain. It was a rough patch of land carved out of the scrub oak, run by a couple named Benson, Mrs. Benson was hanging laundry on a line stretched between 2 aspen trees, her face worn and leathery from the wind. She watched them approach, her eyes narrowing as she took in Elias's size and the gun on his arm, and then shifting to Clara, who sat atop the mule looking pale and determined. "Water for the beast, Mrs.?" Benson asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "And grain, if you have it to spare." Elias said, "We can pay." He produced a silver coin, placing it on the fence post. "Mr." Benson came out of the barn then, carrying a pitchfork. He didn't raise it, but he didn't lower it either. He eyed Elias with the deep, ingrained suspicion of a man who believed that nothing good ever came out of the high timber. "You're the Rourke fellow, aren't you?" "Mister?" Benson asked, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "The one who lives up past the timber line." "I am," Elias said. "And that's the Hollis girl," Benson said. It wasn't a question. Clara stiffened. She felt the weight of their gaze. It wasn't the look of neighbors greeting neighbors. It was the look of people inspecting a spectacle. "Mrs." Benson moved closer to the fence, looking up at Clara. There was kindness in her eyes, but it was a pitying, sharp-edged kindness. "You look better than they said you would." "Child." "Mrs." Benson said softly. "What did they say?" Clara asked. Her voice was steady, though her heart hammered. "Mrs." Benson glanced at her husband, then back to Clara. "The sheriff has been telling folks you were dragged off. Stolen. He says you're unfit to be seen, that the winter ruined you. Ruined." The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Clara straightened her spine. "The sheriff is a liar. Mrs. Benson, I walked up that mountain on my own 2 feet, and I am walking down it the same way." "Mister," Benson snorted, "that ain't the story the town is telling. Girl, best be careful. Hatcher has a warrant out for him." Pointing his chin at Elias. "Kidnapping." Elias stepped forward, resting his hand on the mule's neck. "We aren't hiding," he said. "We are going to clear the record." He took the grain, tipped his hat, and led the mule away. As they walked down the road, Clara could feel the Bensons watching them, their whispers floating on the breeze like dry leaves. Stolen, ruined, unfit. The story was already written. She was walking into a play where her role had been cast without her consent. Silver Creek looked exactly as she remembered it, and yet entirely different. Before, it had been the whole world. Now, after months in the high stillness, it looked small, dirty, and frantic. The mud in the main street was churned into a black paste by wagons and boots. The stamp mill clamored in the distance, a headache made of iron. As they entered the edge of town, the reaction was immediate. A woman sweeping her porch stopped and stared, her broom forgotten. 2 men loading a wagon paused, nudging each other and pointing. The whispers bloomed instantly, spreading from person to person like a contagion. "That's her. That's the one. Look at him. Like a bear. She looks hard. Look at her eyes." Clara kept her gaze forward. She focused on the back of Elias's coat. He walked with his head up, ignoring the stairs, cutting a path through the mud with a grim inevitability. They passed the church. Reverend Thomas was standing on the steps, shaking hands with his parishioners. He saw them. His smile vanished, replaced by a mask of tragic sorrow that was loud enough to be heard from the street. He stepped down to the boardwalk, clasping his hands together. "Clara May!" he called out, his voice trembling with performative grief. "Oh, child, you have returned to us." Clara didn't stop. "The Lord is merciful," the Reverend shouted to the street at large. "He forgives even the darkest stains. Come to the sanctuary. Clara, let us wash you clean." It felt like a knife. It was a public declaration that she was dirty, that she required his specific brand of cleansing. Clara felt the eyes of the townswomen boring into her, women she had once scrubbed floors for, women who now pulled their skirts back as if her shadow might stain their hems. Elias stopped. He turned slowly to look at the preacher. He didn't speak. He just looked, his eyes cold and flat. The preacher's voice faltered. He took a half-step back up the stairs. "We have business at the clerk's office," Elias said to Clara. "Don't look at them." They walked on. The clerk's office was a small, dusty room that smelled of stale tobacco and old paper. The clerk, a bespectacled man named Mr. Abernathy, looked up from his ledger as they entered. His eyes widened when he recognized them. "We are here for a license," Elias said, his voice filling the small room. "A license?" Abernathy stammered. "Marriage," Elias said. Abernathy looked from Elias to Clara. He licked his lips nervously. He stood up, wiping his ink-stained hands on his vest. "Now, see here, Mr. Rourke, there are questions regarding this young woman's status. The sheriff has made it clear that—" "Is she under arrest?" Elias asked. "Well, no, not technically, but is she a minor?" "No, she is 22, but—" "Then give us the paper," Elias said. Abernathy hesitated. He looked at Clara with a mixture of curiosity and arrogance. "Miss Hollis," he said, adopting a tone one might use with a slow child. "Are you doing this of your own free will? You must understand, the law protects women from coercion. If you are afraid—" "I am not afraid of him," Clara said. Her voice was quiet. Abernathy leaned forward. "Are you of sound mind? Miss Hollis, there are reports that your father, that the strain of the winter, he was asking if she was crazy. He was asking if she was broken." Clara felt the walls of the room closing in. She felt the town outside pressing against the glass. She wanted to run. She wanted to bolt for the door and not stop until she was back in the snow, where the only judgment was survival. Her breathing hitched. She took a step back. Elias didn't look at her. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, rough, and solid as a rock. He didn't squeeze, he just held her. He was an anchor in the rising tide. He didn't speak for her. He waited. Clara looked at his hand, then at his face. He was looking at the clerk, but his presence was entirely with her. She took a breath. She squeezed his hand back. "I am of sound mind, Mr. Abernathy," she said clearly. "I am choosing this. Write the paper. The ceremony, if it could be called that, took 5 minutes. There were no vows of love, no flowers, no guests, just the scratch of a pen and the exchange of $2. Do you take this woman?" Abernathy asked, rushing through the words as if he were afraid the sheriff would burst in. "I hold her," Elias said. It was an odd phrasing. Abernathy blinked, but Clara understood. When they walked back out onto the street, the sun was hidden behind the smelter smoke. But on Clara's finger, next to the wooden ring Elias had carved, was a simple band of silver they had bought from the drawer Abernathy kept for hasty unions. They went to the hotel, the only one in town that wasn't a boarding house for minors. Elias paid for a room with the last of his fur money. The clerk sneered but took the coin. Upstairs, the room was small and smelled of lavender water and dust. Elias locked the door. As soon as the bolt slid home, Clara crumbled. She didn't swoon, she broke. The tension that had held her spine straight since they left the cabin snapped. She sat on the edge of the bed and buried her face in her hands. her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. Elias knelt before her. He didn't try to hush her. He pulled her hands away from her face and looked at her. "It's done," he said. "I am a trap." She wept. "I am a trap. And you stepped into it. They will destroy you because of me. You should have left me on the mountain." Elias took her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away the tears. "Listen to me," he said fiercely. "Wife isn't a word to trap me. Clara, and it isn't a word to trap you. It is a promise. I told you I would stand between you and the harm. This is just the wall I built to do it." "But they hate us," she whispered. "Let them hate," Elias said. "We don't need their love. We just need their law. And now we have it." He kissed her forehead, a gesture of infinite tenderness that contrasted sharply with the violence of the world outside. "Now," he said, standing up, "we have to finish it." Clara washed her face in the basin. She looked in the mirror. Her eyes were red, but the fear had receded, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "I need to see him," she said. "Your father?" Clara nodded. "He is the root. I have to cut it. They found Silas Hollis in the shack where she had left him. It was worse than before." The roof had partially collapsed under the winter snow, and the inside smelled of wet rot, unwashed bodies, and cheap whiskey. Silas was sitting on a crate, staring at a dead fire. He looked like a ghost. His skin was gray and draped loosely over his bones. He was gaunt, unshaven, and trembling with the tremors of a man who needed a drink to stop his hands from shaking. He looked up when the door opened. His eyes were bleary, struggling to focus. "Clara," he croaked. Clara stood in the doorway. She didn't step in. The smell was a physical barrier. "Hello? Pa?" Silas tried to stand, then slumped back. "You came back." He mumbled. "I knew you would. I told them. She's a good girl. She knows her duty." He looked at Elias, who stood behind her, filling the doorway with darkness. Silas flinched. "Who is that? Is that the man? The one Hatcher says took you?" "I took myself." "Pa," Clara said. Silas let out a wet, hacking laugh. You never took a breath without asking me first." "You ungrateful little—" He trailed off, his mood swinging violently from self-pity to rage. "You left me here to rot," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I have been starving, freezing, while you were up there playing house with a savage." Clara walked forward. She stopped 3 feet from him. "Did you sell me?" she asked. The room went silent. Silas blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "What? The night I left, in the back of the Golden Nugget. Did you sell me to Hatcher for $50? Silas looked away. He picked at a loose thread on his trousers. "A man's gotta eat. Clara," he whined. It wasn't selling. It was an arrangement. A job. I was looking out for you." $50, Clara repeated. Her voice was flat. "I fed you for 20 years, Silas screamed, slamming his hand on his knee. "I put clothes on your back. I gave you life, and you begrudge me a little help when I'm down? You were born wrong. Clara!" "Your mother was weak, and you're weak, and you've been a millstone around my neck since the day you screamed your way into this world." Elias moved. It was a blur of motion. He stepped past Clara, his hand balling into a fist, his face twisted in a snarl of pure violence. He looked ready to tear Silas apart. "Elias," Clara said sharply. Elias stopped. His fist was inches from Silas's face. Silas cowered, whimpering, covering his head with his arms. Elias stood there, vibrating with rage. He looked at the pathetic, broken man beneath him. Then he looked at Clara. She shook her head. "Not like this." Elias slowly lowered his hand. He stepped back, his chest heaving. Clara looked at her father. She felt nothing. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. There was only a vast, empty pity. "You didn't give me life, Pa," she said quietly. "You just gave me a start. I made the life myself." She turned to leave. "You can't leave me," Silas screamed after her. "I'm your father. You owe me." Clara walked out into the sunlight. She didn't look back. She saw Elias's restraint not as weakness, but as the deepest kind of love. He had wanted to destroy the man who hurt her, but he had refused to make her justice about his fists. They walked back toward the center of town. They needed to find the newspaper office, but the town was done whispering. It was ready to shout. Sheriff Hatcher was waiting for them outside the saloon. He was flanked by the deputy Clara had pulled a knife on, and two other men who looked like they enjoyed hurting people for money. Hatcher smiled when he saw them. It was a smile that didn't reach his dead eyes. "Well, look at this," Hatcher said, his thumbs hooked in his belt. "The prodigal daughter returns, and she brought her pet bear." A small crowd began to gather. Miners, shopkeepers, women with baskets. They formed a loose circle, eager for violence. "Step aside." "Hatcher." Elias said, "I don't think I will." Hatcher replied, "See, there's a matter of kidnapping. We have witnesses who say you dragged this poor girl out of her home in the middle of a storm." "That's a lie," Clara said. Hatcher ignored her. He looked only at Elias. "We're here to rescue you, Miss Hollis. You don't have to be afraid of him anymore. We'll take him into custody, and you can go. Well, we'll find a place for you." The deputy snickered. Elias shifted his weight. He pushed Clara slightly behind him. "She is my wife. Hatcher, we were married an hour ago." Hatcher's smile faltered for a second, then returned. "Sharper, a forced marriage don't count. Rourke. And even if it did, a husband can't break the law. You're coming with us." He unhitched the strap on his holster. The deputy did the same. They were pushing for a brawl. They wanted Elias to draw first. If he drew, they could kill him and call it self-defense. Clara saw the trap. She stepped out from behind Elias. "I chose!" she shouted. Her voice rang out over the mud and the noise. The crowd went silent. "I left on my own," Clara yelled, looking at the faces in the crowd. "I walked into the storm to get away from him." She pointed a shaking finger at Hatcher. "And to get away from my father who tried to sell me to him." A murmur ran through the crowd. Hatcher's face darkened. "Shut your mouth, girl. You're hysterical." "I am not hysterical," Clara cried. "I am telling the truth. Elias Rourke saved my life. I will not be dragged anywhere by you." The preacher pushed his way to the front of the crowd. "She flaunts her sin," Reverend Thomas bellowed. "Listen to her. She defends the beast who ruined her. This is the madness of a corrupted soul. She has bad blood, just like her father." The women in the crowd, the ones who had known Clara for years, turned their backs. It was a synchronized movement of rejection. They adjusted their shawls and looked away, refusing to witness her shame. Hatcher stepped forward. "You're disturbing the peace." "Clara." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. He slapped it against Elias's chest. "You're served. Rourke, abduction, public disorder, and we're seizing your claim up on the ridge pending an investigation into the legality of your deed. And for the girl, morality charges, indecent behavior." He grinned. "The hearing is set for Friday. Until then, don't try to leave town. My boys will be watching." He signaled to his men, and they backed away, leaving Elias and Clara standing alone in the circle of judgment. They retreated to the hotel. They needed allies. They couldn't fight this with just a rifle and a marriage certificate. Clara thought of the people who might help. There was Hattie, the midwife who had delivered her. Hattie lived on the edge of town and didn't care much for the church. There was Arthur Sterling, the man who ran the Silver Creek Gazette. He drank too much, but he hated Hatcher. There was Mr. Henderson, the grocer who grumbled about the sheriff's protection taxes. And there was Isaac, a black laborer who worked the stamp mill and knew exactly what it felt like to be judged by the color of his skin or his name. They spent the afternoon visiting them, moving through the back alleys to avoid the deputies. Hattie was the first. She opened her door, took one look at Clara, and pulled her into a hug that smelled of dried herbs. "I knew you weren't dead," Hattie whispered. "Your mother was stubborn, and you have her chin. She agreed to testify about Silas's neglect." Arthur Sterling was harder to convince. He sat in his office, surrounded by ink pots and empty bottles. "Hatcher will burn my press," Sterling said, looking at the ceiling. "He will burn it anyway eventually." Elias said, "When you can't pay his tax, if you print this, if you print the truth, it goes beyond this valley. The circuit judge reads your paper." Sterling looked at them. He looked at Clara's notebook, which she had placed on his desk. He opened it He read the entry about the $50. He picked up a pencil. "Tell me everything," he said. "From Isaac and Mr. Henderson." They learned the scope of it. It wasn't just Clara. Hatcher ran a business. He arrested women for vagrancy and fined them, forcing them to work off the debt in the laundry or the brothel he silently owned. He seized claims from minors who disappeared or were arrested on trumped-up charges. Justice in Silver Creek wasn't blind. It was for sale. That night, the hotel room felt like a fortress under siege. The sounds of the saloon below drifted up through the floorboards. Piano music, laughter, the breaking of glass. Clara sat by the window, watching the street. Elias paced. "We should go," Elias said. He stopped pacing and looked at her. "We can take the horses. I can get us past the deputies." "We go west, California." "And leave the land?" Clara asked. "Leave my name in the mud? To hell with the name!" Elias said violently. "They are going to crush you. Clara, that hearing? It won't be a trial. It will be a slaughter. They will twist every word you say." "I have the notebook," Clara said. "Paper doesn't stop a hangman," Elias countered. "If they try to take you, if Hatcher puts his hands on you, I will kill him. I won't be able to stop myself. And then we are both dead." He came to her. He pulled her up from the chair and wrapped his arms around her. The embrace was desperate. They clung to each other, the romantic tension spiking under the pressure of the threat. "I love you," Elias whispered into her hair. It was the first time he had said it aloud. "I love you, and that makes me afraid. It makes me easy to hurt." Clara buried her face in his neck. She felt the same terror. Love was a vulnerability. It gave the enemy a target. "But we can't run," she said, pulling back to look at him. "If we run, Hatcher wins. He keeps doing it." Two other girls, two other minors. She picked up the notebook from the table. "I lived my whole life in silence. Elias, I lived afraid of my father, afraid of the town, afraid of my own voice. I won't survive another life built on that. If we go to California, I will still be the girl who ran away." Elias looked at her. He saw the steel in her spine that the winter had forged. He saw that she was right. He let out a long, ragged breath. He rested his forehead against hers. "All right," he said. "We fight." He took her hand and kissed the knuckles, right over the wooden ring. "But if it goes wrong, if the law fails, then I become the law, and I get you out, no matter what." Clara nodded. "I agree." She looked at the notebook lying on the bedside table. The hearing was set for Friday. She was about to put her whole life on trial. She was about to open her veins and bleed onto the courtroom floor, hoping that the truth was enough to drown the lies. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window pane. It sounded like the mountain calling them back, reminding them that the only true justice was survival. But for now, they had to survive the town. The hearing took place in the back room of the town hall, a space usually reserved for town council meetings and the occasional traveling theater troupe. Today, however, it smelled of unwashed wool, stale tobacco, and the sharp, copper scent of nervous sweat. It was a Friday in May, and the room was packed to the rafters. Every bench was full, and men stood 3 deep along the back wall, their hats in their hands, their faces set in expressions of grim righteousness. Judge Holloway sat behind a heavy oak table at the front of the room. He was a circuit judge, a man with a face like a dried apple and eyes that had seen too many hangings. He looked bored, swatting at a fly that buzzed near his ear, but his gavel rested near his hand like a weapon. Clara sat at a small table to the left, Elias beside her. She felt the weight of the town's gaze like a physical pressure, 1,000 invisible hands pressing against her skin, testing her for weakness. She kept her back straight, her hands folded in her lap to hide the tremors. Elias was a statue of granite next to her, his eyes fixed forward, refusing to engage with the murmurs that rippled through the crowd like wind through dry wheat. On the other side of the aisle sat Sheriff Hatcher, looking relaxed and confident. Next to him was his deputy, the young man with the cruel mouth, and Reverend Thomas, who sat with his Bible open on his knees, his lips moving in silent, performative prayer. The proceedings began not with facts, but with character assassination. Hatcher stood up first. He did not speak like a lawman presenting evidence. He spoke like a disappointed father. He painted a picture of Clara that was grotesque in its distortion. He spoke of her instability, her erratic behavior since her mother died, her wandering eye. He claimed she had seduced Elias Rourke, a known mountain savage, and convinced him to abduct her so she could escape her duties to her ailing father. She is a troubled girl. Judge, Hatcher said, hooking his thumbs in his vest, confused, perhaps a bit loose in her morals. We only want to bring her home to a safe environment where she can be corrected. Then came the preacher. Reverend Thomas stood and turned to the crowd, treating the courtroom like his pulpit. The devil finds work for idle hands. He boomed, and this woman has been idle in her faith and loose in her virtue. She ran into the wilderness, a place of darkness, and lay with a man outside the covenant of marriage. She brings shame upon Silver Creek. She is a temptress who has led a violent man to threaten our peace. The crowd murmured their agreement. Shame, temptress, loose. The words floated in the hot air, settling on Clara like ash. Clara, Judge Holloway said, looking over his spectacles. Stand up. Clara stood. Her knees felt like water. Her throat was so tight she thought she might choke. For a terrifying moment, she was 12 years old again, hiding in the pantry while her father negotiated the price of his tab with the miners in the kitchen. She felt small. She felt owned. She looked at Elias. He did not touch her. He knew the crowd would twist any affection into lewdness. But he met her eyes. His gaze was steady, calm, and absolute. I hold you. His eyes said, You are not small. Clara took a breath. She turned to the judge. Tell us your version. The judge said, And be quick about it. It is not a version, Clara said. Her voice was quiet, and someone in the back shouted for her to speak up. Clara raised her chin. It is the truth, she said. Louder this time. I did not run away to be with a man. I ran away to survive. She told them. She did not weep, and she did not shout. She spoke with a dry, hard clarity. She told them about the years of hunger. She told them about the deputy following her in the street, whispering things that made her skin crawl. She told them about the back room of the Golden Nugget. I heard them, Clara said, looking directly at Hatcher. I heard my father and the sheriff. They agreed on a price, $50. That was the price of my life. My father's bar tab was cleared, and I was to be sent to a place in Durango. They called it a job, but they were selling me. Lies, a voice shouted from the crowd. Clara didn't flinch. I ran into the storm because freezing to death felt cleaner than what they had planned for me. Elias Rourke found me. He saved me. He did not touch me. He did not harm me. He gave me a choice, which is more than anyone in this town ever did. She sat down. The room was silent for a heartbeat, the weight of her accusation hanging in the air. Then Hatcher laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound, a vivid imagination. He said, The girl is hysterical. Call Silas Hollis, the judge ordered. Silas was brought in through the side door. He had been cleaned up for the occasion. He wore a borrowed suit that was too big for his shrunken frame, and his hair had been combed flat with oil. He looked like a tragic figure, a grieving father broken by his daughter's rebellion. He took the stand, wringing his hat in his hands. Mr. Hollis, Hatcher said gently, did you ever agree to sell your daughter? Silas looked at the floor, then at the crowd. He sniffed loudly. Never, he said, his voice trembling. I love my girl. I only wanted what was best for her. I found her a good position, housekeeping, honorable work. He looked at Clara, his eyes filling with crocodile tears. I don't know why she hates me. He sobbed. I gave her everything. I worked my fingers to the bone, and she runs off with this animal. She broke my heart. The crowd made sympathetic noises. Poor Silas. Such a hard life. Clara's lawyer, if he could be called that, was Arthur Sterling, the newspaper man. He stood up, smelling faintly of gin, but his eyes were sharp. Mr. Hollis, Sterling said, you say you worked your fingers to the bone, but the mine records show you haven't worked a shift in 2 years. How have you been paying your tab at the Nugget? Friends, Silas snapped, his demeanor shifting instantly. I have friends who help me. And this housekeeping job, Sterling pressed. Was it at the Willow Creek house in Durango? Silas froze. That was a brothel. Everyone knew it. I don't recall the name. Silas stammered. You don't recall where you were sending your only child. Stop badgering the witness, Hatcher shouted. Silas's face turned red. The tragic mask slipped, revealing the drunkard beneath. She is ungrateful, Silas shouted, standing up and pointing a shaking finger at Clara. She is a burden, born wrong, just like her mother. Useless mouth to feed. A man has to eat, doesn't he? A man has a right to dispose of his property. The room gasped. He had said it. Property. Silas realized his mistake. He looked around wildly, seeing the shock on the faces of the women in the front row. He turned his rage on Clara. You little witch, he screamed. You orchestrated this. You want to humiliate me. You are filth. You are a whore, just like... Sit down. The judge banged his gavel. Get him out of here. Two bailiffs dragged Silas away, kicking and screaming obscenities. The silence he left behind was heavy. The charm was gone. The monster was out in the open. Call Hattie Miller, Sterling said. The midwife walked to the stand. She was an old woman, tough as leather, respected by every woman in the room because she had delivered half their children. She didn't look at Hatcher. She looked at the women in the crowd. I was there when Clara's mother died. Hattie said, it wasn't the fever that killed her. It was the cold. There was no wood in the box, no food in the larder. Silas was at the saloon. Clara was 18, trying to keep her mother warm with her own body heat. She paused, letting the image sink in. That girl isn't bad blood, Hattie said firmly. She is a survivor. She raised herself in a disaster. And if she ran, it is because she had the good sense to know when the house was falling down. Hatcher looked unbothered. He leaned over and whispered something to the judge. The judge nodded. This is all very touching, Hatcher said, standing up, but it doesn't change the law. The girl is a minor under her father's care, regardless of his character flaws. And the man, Elias Rourke, is a violent criminal. Hatcher turned to Elias. He smiled. A shark sensing blood. Let us talk about Leadville. Mr. Rourke, 1874. You killed a man there, didn't you? Elias stood slowly. The chair scraped against the floor. I did not kill him, Elias said. But you beat him within an inch of his life, Hatcher said. A foreman, a respected man. And then you assaulted a deputy who tried to arrest you. You are a fugitive. Rourke, you have a history of violence against the law. Elias stepped out from behind the table. He looked at the crowd. The foreman was stealing wages from the men. Elias said. His voice was deep, carrying to the back of the room without shouting. He was starving families to pad his own pockets. The deputy was his brother-in-law. They came for me in the night. They didn't come to arrest me. They came to hang me without a trial. He looked at Hatcher. I fought back. I disarmed the deputy. I left him alive. If I was the killer you say I am, neither of them would have walked away. And neither would you. The threat was implicit, but it was delivered with such cold control that a shiver went through the room. Hatcher's smile tightened. We have a warrant, he said. An old one, but valid. You are a danger to this community. The room began to shift. The men who had come hungry for a hanging were confused. Silas had looked like the villain. Hatcher looked like a bully. Elias sounded like a man defending himself. Sterling stood up again. He held up a ledger. If we are talking about records, Sterling said, I have some here. Records of fines levied by the sheriff's office against women in this town. Vagrancy, loitering, disorderly conduct. All of them worked off at the laundry run by the Reverend or sent to houses out of town. He opened the book. It seems Sheriff Hatcher receives a consulting fee from these establishments. A very generous one. Objection, Hatcher roared. This is slander. It is arithmetic. Sterling shouted back. You are running a trade in human beings, Hatcher, and Clara Hollis was just the next line item. The room erupted. Men were shouting. The judge was banging his gavel, but the sound was swallowed by the noise. The deputy, the young one, lost his temper. He jumped up, his face flushed. She needed a lesson, he shouted over the din, prancing around town, looking at men, acting like she was better than us. Girls like that need to be taught their place. The room went suddenly quiet. The deputy realized too late what he had said. He had confirmed the malice. He had confirmed the threat. Sterling pointed a finger at him. "There it is," he yelled. "That is the law in Silver Creek, teaching girls lessons. Outside." The noise was growing. The sheriff's men were circling the building, their hands on their guns. Inside, the crowd was splitting. The simple morality play the preacher had promised had turned into something ugly and complicated. "Court is in recess," the judge bellowed, his face purple. "Everyone out. We reconvene tomorrow morning." Elias grabbed Clara's arm. "We are leaving now." They pushed through the crowd. Some men stepped aside, eyeing Elias with new respect. Others, the sheriff's cronies, blocked the way, shoulders checked, spitting on the floor. They made it to the hotel as the sun was setting. The sky was the color of a bruise. Inside the room, Elias barricaded the door with a chair. He moved the dresser in front of the window. He checked his rifle, his hands moving with a mechanical precision that barely concealed the tremors of rage beneath. Clara sat on the bed. She felt stripped. Every secret, every shame, every painful memory had been dragged out and examined by the town. She felt raw, as if the skin had been peeled from her body. "Elias," she whispered. He turned to her. He put the rifle down and crossed the room. He didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his arms. It wasn't a gentle embrace. It was desperate. They clung to each other like two people drowning. Clara buried her face in his chest, inhaling the scent of him, sweat, gun oil, and the pine scent that still lingered on his coat. "It was the only real thing in a world of lies. I am sorry," Elias said into her hair. "I am so sorry they did that to you. I had to say it," Clara said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I had to let them see it." "You were brave," Elias said, "braver than any man in that room." He pulled back to look at her. His eyes were dark with fear, but it wasn't fear for himself. "I feel like a weapon," he confessed, his voice low. "Sitting there, listening to them lies. I wanted to kill them. Clara, I wanted to tear the throat out of that room. I am holding on by a thread." Clara reached up and touched his face. She traced the line of his jaw, the tension in his neck. "Don't let go," she said. "If you kill them, they win. They want you to be the monster. Don't give it to them." She pulled him down onto the bed. They lay fully clothed, tangled together, seeking the grounding of physical contact. It wasn't about escape. It was about reminding themselves that they were real, that they belonged to each other and not to the town. "I am terrified," Clara admitted into the darkness. "I am terrified that I will just become my father's story of me. The drunk's daughter, the ruin." "You are already rewriting it," Elias said. "Today. You took the pen out of their hands. You wrote the truth. But will it matter?" Clara asked. "The judge. He looks at Hatcher and sees a partner. Then we make it matter," Elias said. They fell into a fitful sleep, waking at every creak of the floorboards, every shout from the street below. The next morning, the mood in the town had shifted. The air was heavy, charged with the static of coming violence. When the hearing reconvened, there was a new witness. It was the bartender from the Golden Nugget, a small, nervous man named Peters. He had been subpoenaed by Sterling. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Mr. Peters," Sterling asked, "were you working the night of November 12th? "I was," Peters whispered. "Did you see Silas Hollis and Sheriff Hatcher in the back room?" "I did. Did you hear their conversation?" Peters looked at Hatcher. Hatcher stared back, his eyes dead and cold, a silent threat. Peters swallowed hard. He looked at Clara. He saw the way she sat, straight and proud. Despite the hell they were putting her through, "I heard it," Peters said, his voice gaining a fraction of strength. "Silas was crying about his debt. The sheriff told him the owner wanted collateral, then the other man, the stranger, he said $50. For the girl." "Was there any mention of a housekeeping job?" Sterling asked. "No," Peters said. "The stranger said He said she was scrawny, but young. He said the place in Durango paid a finder's fee. The courtroom erupted again. This time, the gavel couldn't stop it. The illusion of legality was crumbling. Hatcher wasn't just a hard man, he was a slaver. The judge looked pale. He looked at Hatcher, then at the angry faces of the shopkeepers and miners who were realizing that their daughters could be next. "Recess!" the judge screamed. 1 hour. Elias and Clara walked out into the hallway. The crowd parted for them, the mood ambiguous. They weren't heroes yet, but they weren't villains anymore. They stood near the water barrel, trying to catch their breath. Hatcher appeared at the end of the hall. He was alone. He walked toward them, removing his gun belt and handing it to a deputy who stood by the door. He stopped 5 feet from Elias. "You think you're smart, don't you, mountain man?" Hatcher said softly. "You think bringing a few crying witnesses changes anything?" "I own this town." Elias looked at him. "I think the town is waking up." Hatcher stepped closer. He invaded Elias's space. He tapped Elias on the chest with a finger. "You're a killer. Rourke, I see it in your eyes. You want to snap my neck right now? Go ahead, do it. Give me a reason to hang you." He shoved Elias. It was a hard, violent shove. "Come on," Hatcher hissed. "Fight me. Show them what you are." Elias stumbled back a step. His hands clenched into fists. The veins in his neck bulged. Every instinct in his body screamed to strike, to crush the man who had tormented Clara. Clara watched. Her breath caught in her throat. She saw the violence rising in Elias like a tide. "Don't," she whispered. Elias looked at her. He took a breath. He unclenched his fists. He looked back at Hatcher and smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. "I don't have to fight you," Elias said. "I just have to watch you hang yourself," Hatcher snarled. He swung. It was a vicious right hook aimed at Elias's jaw. Elias didn't block it. He caught it. His hand snapped up, catching Hatcher's fist in midair. The sound of meat hitting meat was loud in the quiet hallway. Elias gripped Hatcher's hand, crushing the knuckles. He twisted, stepping in, using his leverage. He didn't punch. He swept Hatcher's legs out from under him and drove him into the wall. He pinned him there, his forearm against Hatcher's throat. Hatcher gasped, his face turning red, his feet dangling inches off the floor. Elias leaned in close. "I am not the man I was in Leadville," Elias whispered. "I have something to lose now." He let go. Hatcher slid to the floor, coughing and humiliated. Elias turned his back on him and walked to Clara. "Let's get some air," he said. They walked out the front doors of the town hall. The sunlight was blinding after the dim hallway. The crowd was gathered on the steps, arguing, shouting. The tension was at a breaking point. Suddenly, a figure lunged from the shadow of the pillars. It was the deputy, the one who had been humiliated on the stand. He wasn't thinking about the law. He was thinking about his pride. "You bitch!" he screamed. He grabbed Clara by the arm, spinning her around. He raised his hand to strike her, to drag her down the stairs. Clara didn't freeze. She didn't scream for Elias. She dropped her weight, just as she had learned on the ice. She drove her boot backward, stomping hard on the deputy's instep. As he doubled over in pain, she drove her elbow back into his ribs. It wasn't a graceful move. It was a desperate, ugly, survival move. The deputy stumbled back, gasping. "You step back!" Clara shouted, her voice ringing out over the square. The deputy snarled and reached for his gun. Elias was there. He didn't just step in. He descended. He grabbed the deputy by the collar and the belt, lifted him bodily into the air, and threw him. The deputy flew 5 feet and landed in the mud of the street with a wet thud. Elias stood on the steps, Clara beside him. He looked at the crowd, his chest heaving. "Is there anyone else?" Elias roared. "Is there any other man here who wants to hurt my wife?" The crowd looked at the deputy groaning in the mud. They looked at Hatcher stumbling out of the doorway, clutching his throat. They looked at Clara, standing tall with her fists clenched, and Elias, a wall of protective fury. And then the town split. "That's enough, Mr. Henderson, the grocer," shouted. He stepped forward, standing between Elias and the sheriff's men. "This has gone on long enough. Let the girl be," a woman's voice called out. It was Hattie. More people stepped forward. The miners who had been cheated. The women who feared for their daughters. The shopkeepers tired of the taxes. They formed a wall, not facing Elias but facing the sheriff. "Justice!" someone shouted. "We want real justice." The hearing was over. The riot was beginning. And in the chaos, Clara realized that she wasn't on trial anymore. The riot outside the town hall did not turn into a massacre, but it broke the dam that had held back the truth for too long. The sight of Deputy Miller lying in the mud, felled by a woman he had tried to humiliate, and Sheriff Hatcher nursing a crushed hand, stunned the crowd into a breathless silence. It was the silence of a people realizing that the monster they feared was made of meat and bone, just like them. Judge Holloway, watching from the safety of the vestibule, saw the tide turn. He was a political creature, and he knew that when the wind shifted, a wise man adjusted his sails or risked capsizing. He banged his gavel on the doorframe, a hollow sound in the open air, and declared that the hearing would continue, but the authority in his voice was brittle. By noon, Arthur Sterling had the printing press running hot. The special edition of the Silver Creek Gazette was hitting the streets before the ink was dry. The headline was simple and damning: "Justice for sale, the sheriff's ledger exposed." Sterling had printed the numbers, the dates, and the names of the women who had been fined into servitude. The paper moved through the town like wildfire, passing from hand to hand, turning whispers into shouts. Sheriff Hatcher saw the paper. He saw the way the shopkeepers looked at him, not with fear anymore, but with a dangerous, simmering calculations. He knew how these mining towns worked. A man could be king in the morning and swinging from a rope by sundown if the mob decided he was the villain. He didn't wait for the judge to issue a warrant. He went to his office, unlocked the safe with his good hand, and stuffed his saddlebags with gold certificates and the deeds he had stolen. He took the back alley, mounting his horse and kicking it into a gallop, heading not for the main road, but for the scrublands to the south, aiming for the border. He might have made it, had Clara May Rourke not been watching. She was standing at the window of the hotel room, packing the few things they had brought down from the mountain. She saw the dust cloud rising from the alley behind the jail. She saw the distinct, panicked gait of the sheriff's gray gelding. "He is running," Clara said. Elias was at her side in a second. He looked at the dust. "He has the money," Elias said grimly, "and the deeds. If he crosses the territory line, he is gone, and he takes the proof with him." They didn't wait for permission. They ran to the livery stable. Mr. Henderson, the grocer, saw them running and dropped his crate of apples. "He is running," Henderson shouted. "The sheriff is making a break for it." It wasn't a posse sanctioned by the law. It was a group of people tired of being victims. Henderson grabbed a shotgun. Isaac, the mill worker, mounted a mule. 2 other miners joined them, but Elias and Clara were in the lead, riding the pack animals they had brought down, pushing them hard toward the foothills. The chase led them away from the road and into the teeth of the landscape. The spring runoff had turned the low country into a bog. The ground was a soup of clay and meltwater that sucked at the horses' hooves. The wind came tearing down from the peaks, cutting through coats and stinging eyes. It was a miserable, indifferent country that cared nothing for human concepts of justice. They tracked him for 3 hours. The sheriff was riding a better horse, but he was riding with panic. He made mistakes. He forced his mount through deep water where he should have gone around. He left a trail of broken sagebrush and churned mud that a blind man could follow. It was Clara who spotted him. They had reached a box canyon, a dead end of red rock and scrub oak where the water from the high melt gathered in a roaring, muddy torrent. Clara pulled her mule up, shielding her eyes against the glare of the afternoon sun. "There," she pointed, up in the rocks. Hatcher had realized his mistake. The canyon was a trap. He had dismounted and was trying to scramble up a scree slope on foot, dragging his heavy saddlebags with him. Elias swung down from his saddle. He pulled his Winchester from the scabbard. "Stay here," he told the others. Clara dismounted. I am coming with you." Elias looked at her. He saw the set of her jaw, the same look she had worn when she pulled the knife on the deputy. He didn't argue. He knew that this was her ghost to exorcise. They climbed the slope, boots slipping on the loose shale. Hatcher saw them coming. He abandoned the saddlebags, letting them slide down the hill in a shower of gold paper, and scrambled behind a large boulder. "That is far enough," Hatcher screamed. His voice was ragged, cracking with exertion and fear. Elias stopped. He stood in the open, 50 yards below the boulder. He didn't raise his rifle. He held it across his chest, his stance wide and grounded. "It is over." "Hatcher," Elias called out. "The town knows. The judge knows." "There is nowhere to run," Hatcher laughed. A jagged, hysterical sound. "The town is a flock of sheep. I sheared them for 10 years. They will forget in a week." He popped up, firing a wild shot from his revolver. The bullet kicked up dirt 10 feet to Elias's left. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't return fire. He just took a step forward. Clara stepped up beside him. "Look at me! Hatcher!" she shouted. Hatcher peered over the rock. He saw her standing there, wind whipping her hair across her face, mud on her hem, looking nothing like the terrified girl he had cornered in the alley weeks ago. "Go home, whore," Hatcher spat. "Go back to your drunk father. You are nothing. You are just a piece of trash I forgot to take out." He was trying to use the old weapons. Shame, disgust. He wanted her to shrink. He wanted her to believe that she was what he called her. Clara felt the words hit her, but they didn't penetrate. They bounced off the armor she had forged in the winter silence. "I am Clara Rourke," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the wind. "I am a wife. I am a witness. And I am the woman who beat you." She walked forward. "Shoot me if you have the nerve." "Hatcher, but look me in the eye when you do it. Look at the person, not the rumor." Hatcher hesitated. In his world, power came from fear. He couldn't understand why she wasn't afraid. It broke his rhythm. It made his hands shake. He stood up, leveling his pistol at her chest. "I will kill you," he snarled. "I will kill you both and leave you for the coyotes." Elias moved. It wasn't a rage-fueled charge. It was a precise, calculated action. He brought the Winchester up. He didn't aim for the chest. He didn't aim to kill. He aimed for the threat. The rifle cracked once. Hatcher screamed and dropped the pistol. He clutched his right shoulder, spinning around from the impact and falling hard against the rock. Elias worked the lever of the rifle, ejecting the spent shell, and walked up the slope. He kicked the pistol away. Hatcher lay in the dirt, groaning, blood seeping through his fingers. He looked up at Elias, expecting the killing shot. He expected the mountain man to be the savage he had painted him as. "Do it," Hatcher wheezed. "Finish it." Elias looked down at him. The anger was there, a hot coal in his chest, urging him to pull the trigger. He remembered the way Hatcher had looked at Clara in the courtroom. He remembered the threats. It would be so easy. It would be justice. But then he felt a hand on his arm. Clara was there. She didn't pull the rifle down. She just touched him. "He isn't worth the hanging." "Elias," she said quietly. Elias looked at her. He saw the peace in her eyes. She didn't need Hatcher dead to be whole. She just needed him stopped. Elias lowered the rifle. "You are right," he said. He reached down, grabbed Hatcher by the collar, and hauled him to his feet. "You are going back," Elias said to the wounded man. "You are going to stand in that courtroom, and you are going to listen to every word of the testimony. You are going to live with what you did." They marched him back down the hill. The group of allies was waiting. Henderson looked at the wounded sheriff, then at Elias. "You didn't kill him," Henderson said, sounding surprised. "Death is too easy," Elias replied. "Let him rot in a cell." The return to town was a procession. People came out of their houses to watch the sheriff being led to his own jail, bleeding and broken. The deputy, Miller, was already in a cell, having been arrested by the Citizens Committee. The power structure of Silver Creek didn't just crack, it shattered. By evening, the circuit judge had issued a formal ruling. The charges against Elias were dismissed with prejudice. The marriage was recognized as legal and binding. The deed to Elias's claim was affirmed. Sheriff Hatcher was charged with corruption, extortion, and attempted murder. The preacher, seeing the writing on the wall, had locked the church doors and refused to come out. But the town council was already drafting a letter to the bishop regarding the misappropriation of funds from the charity home. But the final piece of the puzzle was the hardest to fit. Silas Hollis was sitting on the steps of the boardwalk outside the saloon. He had been thrown out when his credit was finally, irrevocably canceled. He looked small in the fading light. He was shivering, not from cold, but from withdrawal. Clara walked up to him. Elias stood back, giving her space. Silas looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and watery. "Clara," he rasped. You won. It wasn't a fight. Pa," Clara said. It was just the truth. Silas wiped his nose on his sleeve. "They took my tab. Clara, they threw me out. I have nowhere to go." He looked at her with that familiar, pathetic hope. "You have a husband now. A man of property. You could take me in, just for a while, until I get on my feet. I am your father. Clara, you can't leave me in the street." Clara looked at him. She remembered the nights she had sat up waiting for him, the bruises she had covered with flour, the shame she had swallowed to protect his name. She felt a phantom pull, the old instinct to fix him, to save him from himself. But then she touched the silver ring on her finger. She felt the weight of the notebook in her pocket. "I can't save you, Silas," she said. "What?" Silas blinked. "But I am family. You are the man who tried to sell me," Clara said. Her voice was not angry. It was incredibly sad. "You are the man who taught me that love comes with a bruise. I am done with that lesson." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a single gold coin, one Elias had given her from the fur money. "I will pay for a room at the boarding house for 1 week," she said, placing the coin on the step beside him. "And I will pay for the doctor to see to your tremors. But I will not take you in, and I will not give you money for whiskey." Silas stared at the coin. "You are cruel," he whispered. "No," Clara said. "I am just free." She turned and walked away. She heard him calling her name, turning the plea into a curse as she got further away. But she didn't slow down. She didn't look back. She left him there on the steps, a man alone with his choices. That night, the hotel room felt different. The siege was over, but the victory had a cost. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. The adrenaline had faded, leaving her exhausted and raw. She felt hollowed out, as if the fight had taken everything she had. Elias stood by the window, watching the street. He was quiet, brooding. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked. Elias turned. He looked at his hands, the hands that had almost beaten Hatcher to death, the hands that had almost pulled the trigger on the mountain. "I wanted to kill him," Elias said softly. "Up on that rock. I wanted it so bad. Clara, it scared me. I thought I was done with that part of me." "You didn't do it," Clara said. "But I wanted to. That makes you human. Elias, not a monster. You chose mercy." Elias walked over to her. He sat on the floor at her feet, resting his head against her knees. It was a gesture of submission, of fatigue. "I am tired of fighting," he said. "Me too," Clara whispered, stroking his hair. They stayed in town for 2 more days to sign the papers, but the air in Silver Creek was stale for them now. The victory was legal, but the social stain didn't vanish overnight. Some of the townswomen still crossed the street to avoid Clara. Some men still sneered at Elias when his back was turned. Prejudice was a weed with deep roots. You could cut the top off, but the ground remained poisoned. "We can't stay here," Clara said on the 3rd morning. "Every corner holds a bad memory." "We can go west," Elias suggested again. "California." Clara looked out the window at the peaks rising in the distance, white and sharp against the blue sky. "No," she said, "that is our home, the cabin. We earned it." So they packed the mules. They loaded the flour, the coffee, the nails, and the glass for the windows. They turned their backs on Silver Creek and began the climb. The journey up was different than the desperate flight down. The spring had finally taken hold. The mud was drying into hard earth. The aspen trees were unfurling leaves the color of new money. The creek that had nearly drowned Clara was running clear and bright, singing over the stones. As they crossed the timberline, the air thinned, becoming crisp and clean. It tasted of pine and snow. The cabin looked smaller than Clara remembered. It sat crouched among the boulders, weathered and gray. But as they approached, she didn't feel the fear she had felt that first night. She felt a profound sense of recognition. "It needs a new roof," Elias said, looking critically at the shingles. "And a garden," Clara added. "On the south side, potatoes will grow there." They unloaded the animals. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. They moved with the easy, synchronized rhythm of a couple who had survived a winter together. That evening, Elias built a fire. They sat at the rough table, eating bread and cheese. It wasn't a feast, but it felt like one. Elias reached across the table and took Clara's hand. He ran his thumb over the wooden ring, then over the silver one next to it. "I never thought I would have this," he said quietly. "I thought I was meant to be alone. I thought I didn't deserve tenderness." Clara looked at him. She saw the scars on his knuckles and the lines around his eyes. She saw the man who had carried her through the snow, the man who had stood between her and the mob. "Love isn't something you deserve, Elias," she said. "It isn't a wage you earn. It is something you practice. Like shooting a rifle or banking a fire. You just keep doing it, day after day, until you get it right." Elias smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I reckon I can practice," he said later, while Elias checked the horses. Clara sat by the fire with a new notebook she had bought in town. She dipped the pen in the ink. She wasn't writing evidence anymore. She wasn't writing a defense. She was writing for herself. She wrote about the sound of the wind. She wrote about the way the light hit the peaks at dawn. She wrote about the feel of Elias's hand in hers. She was writing proof. Proof that she had endured. Proof that she had chosen love without surrendering herself. She was writing the first chapter of a life that belonged to her. Elias came back inside. He bolted the door, not against monsters, but simply to keep the warmth in. He came to her, pulling her up from the chair. His kiss was different now. It wasn't the desperate, frantic collision of the winter. It was steady, it was deep, it was braided with trust and laughter and the profound comfort of being known. "Come look," he said. He led her to the door and opened it. The sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the snow in shades of violet and gold. The air was still. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely, wild sound. Clara stood on the threshold. Elias stood behind her, his large frame shielding her from the wind. He placed his hand on her waist. He didn't grip her. He didn't claim her. He simply rested his hand there, a silent statement that he belonged alongside her. They looked out over the vast, indifferent, beautiful world. Below them, the town of Silver Creek continued its noisy, messy life, full of judgment and greed and small mercies. But up here, in the thin air, there was only the truth. They had carved out a fragile hope. It wasn't a perfect peace. It was a life earned with blood and testimony. But as the first stars pricked the darkening sky, Clara leaned back against her husband and knew, with a fierce and stubborn certainty, that this life was theirs. "Thank you for listening to I'm a Drunk's Daughter," she confessed. "Mountain Man said, 'You're my wife. That's all that matters.'" I hope this story of Clara and Elias resonated with you. It is a tale about the hard road to dignity and the healing power of a love that respects rather than owns. I would love to hear where you are listening from today. Are you in the mountains, the city, or somewhere in between? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the story in English. If you enjoyed this journey into the American frontier, please consider subscribing to From Wild West. We have many more stories of survival, romance, and the untamed spirit of the West waiting for you. Until next time, keep your chin up and your powder dry.